The Atheist Debates Patreon project presents a debate review of Matt Dillahunty versus Muslim apologist Daniel Haqiqatjou, Part 2. And there's going to be probably 4 parts. The first part of this wasn't actually about the first part of the debate. This was a weird debate. Welcome, everybody. It was 3 hours of debating over 3 very specific topics. In the first part of my review, which is already available on the channel, I go through everything that led up to the debate, the topics and how they changed and or didn't change, because he's going to go back to referring to them the way they originally were as part of this debate. And one thing about an incident that occurred where he was basically like, come over here and say that. So I did. That's all addressed in part 1 of the review. This is technically part 2 of the review, which covers part 1 of the debate. And this is taking me a while to do because I wanted to do this one differently. A lot of my debate reviews are done relatively soon after I finish the debate. They're done from memory. I don't always tend to go back and watch them. I go back and look through my notes and I talk about what I plan to do, what I prepared to do, what I think I did do, what my opponent did, and how I responded to it in kind of loose structure. This one's going to be a little different. I've actually gone back and rewatched the debate and taken a lot of notes, and I'm going to be playing parts of the debate, good chunks of the debate right here in a window while I pause to comment on it. Now, I'm going to be playing it at like 1.25 speed because normal speed's too slow and 1.5 is too much. You can speed it all up more if you want to, but this is going to be long. And what I'm interested to see is feedback from my patrons and subscribers and the people who are trying to learn as much as they can about how and why I do what I do. If this particular style of putting the video, pausing it, interjecting, talking about what's going on, despite the fact that it's longer, is actually more beneficial than a shorter summary. Do you get more out of it this way? So leave your comments below and everything else. The video for part 2 of the debate, I'm not going to use video from the debate. I'm just going to give a quick summary. So you'll be able to compare this one, the video for part 1, which is part 2 of my review, the video for part 2, which is part 3 of my review, and then part 3, which is part 3 of the debate, which will be part 4 of my review. I should have come up with a numbering scheme that wasn't so dang confusing. That one's going to be done like this, where I'm going to play the video and comment on it. And I might do that one without watching it all the way through at a time. And so here we go. Part 1 of the debate, which was done at Modern Day Debates in Houston, was about, is there evidence for God? It was originally, is there good evidence for God? That got changed to, is there evidence for God? But Daniel talks about it when he's doing his opening as, is there good evidence for God? In my opening remarks, which begins at the 2-minute mark of the debate, I talked about what counts as evidence for God, and that we were specifically looking for objectively verifiable facts that are consistent with the proposition. And at around the 2-minute and 30-second mark or so, I pointed out that subjective, unverifiable suspicions aren't a reliable path to truth. There's a reason we want objectively verifiable facts, and that's because subjective, unverifiable suspicions don't get us anywhere. And yet, as it turns out, I was a little more prescient, perhaps, than I suspected I was, as I had no idea what Daniel was going to present. But Daniel's entire case is about intuition, which is, I think, like a great word for subjective, unverifiable suspicions, or unverified suspicions, as some intuitions we rely on and then verify and investigate them using the sort of analytic thinking that he's going to complain about. Most of the rest of my opening is like a Logic 101, Evidence 101 discussion, or dissertation, I guess, about how to go about evaluating claims to determine, is it reasonable to believe them? And what would count as good evidence or not good evidence? And Daniel's opening is different. I'm going to pause it frequently in order to comment on it. but he starts off with this.
Suela. The debate today is whether Islam is true.
No, Daniel, the debate today is not about whether Islam is true. And this for his opening remarks, one of the first things that I do is state what the topic of the debate is. And I'm really diligent about making sure that I'm trying to state the topic of the debate as it was agreed to, because it's really exhausting to be the one who constantly shows up to a debate, prepared to debate the topic we agreed to, only to have my opponent switch the topic or pull a bait and switch or concede my entire worldview in order to ask me about something else. So Daniel starts off with what is perhaps a poisoning the well fallacy by saying, the debate today is whether Islam is true. No, it's not. The debate was about three topics. The first one is there good evidence for the existence of God? That doesn't mention Islam at all. The second one is whether or not Islam is more compelling than any other religion, and whether or not something is compelling is independent from whether or not it's true. And the third one was about whether or not secular humanism or Islam is better for the world. And something can be better for the world even if it's not ultimately true, if the thing that it's competing with is worse for the world. None of this has to do with anything about Islam being true. And with none of the three topics being on that, and yet him portraying it this way at the outset, what he's trying to do is say that if he can convince you of any of the three, then he's done stellar work towards demonstrating that Islam is true. And that is simply false. It is fallacious propaganda to get you to think that we're going to be debating whether or not Islam is true when we have three very specific topics, and that's what we decided to address.
We've divided the debate into three sections or three parts. Is there good evidence for God? Is there any religion more compelling than Islam? And which is best for society, secular humanism or Islam? Debating these questions will allow us to answer the overarching question, is Islam true? First, is there good evidence for God? What kind of evidence is compelling evidence? When we ask, is there compelling evidence for God, we should also ask, compelling for whom? How do we decide what is or isn't compelling? It depends on the audience. If we were to ask 11th century Europeans if they found the existence of God compelling, virtually all of them would say yes. But if we ask 21st century Europeans, far fewer would say yes.
So when he says, hey, when we talk about what's compelling, we should say compelling for whom? No, we shouldn't. See, that is injecting even more subjectivity. The fact that people are convinced of something is completely independent from whether or not it's true. The fact that people find something compelling is completely independent from whether or not it's true. So even if this were to be a debate about whether Islam is true, which is not the subject of the debate, going with what's most compelling is not a path to discovering what's actually true. And to say, well, 11th century people versus 21st century Europeans aren't going to be convinced of the same thing. Yes, but that's not about intuition in the first place, which is what he's getting ready to make a case for. And what people find compelling is independent from what they find is true. That's
changed. Atheists claim people have just become smarter, more scientific, more in touch with reality. That's the atheist narrative. But I want to propose a competing narrative.
All right. He wants to compose a competing narrative, and he wants to frame this as if atheists say that we've just gotten smarter and more scientific. I don't know why he's doing this atheist say, other than I'm an atheist, because it's not just atheists that say it. People from all walks of life will acknowledge that we are, in fact, in the 21st century, smarter with better understanding of how the world works than we were in the 11th century. Ironic that Daniel seems to want to go back in time to when we clearly understood less about the world.
Cognitive science says that human beings have natural intuitions, whether they're moral, religious, aesthetic, logical, or mathematical intuitions. Intuitions are mostly unconscious, and they're based on the feeling of compellingness rather than systematic proof.
So intuitions are almost instinctive. That's generally what the word kind of means, that you're reaching a conclusion without, like cognitive assessment, without reasoning. You are naturally able to grasp something. And so he's going to make this case for intuition based on cognitive science, saying that human beings have natural intuitions. But what he's going to do is confuse intuition with inference. And we infer quite a bit, and we use inductive reasoning, which is still a form of reasoning. It's not intuition. Inductive reasoning is not intuition. It is a process of evaluating evidence that is reliable. Science is inductive reasoning. Deductive reasoning is things like logic and math. Science is inductive inferences. And so we're still evaluating evidence, and we're trying to come up with the best way to do it. Daniel would like to pit analytic thinking against intuitive thinking, and that's what he's going to do here in his opening. And he would like to make it seem as if analytic thinking is the science and intuition thinking is the spirituality, and that they're both, path to truth that atheists just dismiss. But in reality, he's going to use the word intuition to talk about things that are sometimes, some of his examples may be intuitions, and some of them, in fact, are inferences. And I have no problem with inferences or intuitions. My issue here is, what's the demonstration that your intuitions or your inferences are likely to be correct?
For example, people have the intuition that harming others for no reason is wrong. This is an intuition because people might not even have articulated this as a concrete belief, and they have no logical justification for it, but they still strongly tend to accept it as true. Psychologists have shown that all children naturally develop this moral intuition earlier in life. Beyond moral intuitions, there's also aesthetic intuitions. Humans universally experience disgust at the thought of eating human flesh. There are also logical intuitions. We all intuitively accept the law of non-contradiction, that two contradictory statements cannot both be true at the
The law of non-contradiction is not an intuition at all. It is a deductive inference about which we can not only demonstrate the truth of it, showing how reliable this is. This is a foundation of reason, but it's not an intuition. It's not like we just, you could have an intuition about it. Certainly, you can have an intuition about anything. But the reason that we generally almost intuitively accept the law of non-contradiction is because we have a massive evidence for it, that this is true. What we aren't able to demonstrate, which will come up later in the debate, is that the law of non-contradiction is universal and inviolate, which means that it will always be true. It's definitely true in every circumstance that we can come up with, and any that we can theoretically hypothesize might come up, and nobody's ever been able to demonstrate a circumstance under which it wouldn't be true, and you would have to assume it's true in order to try to prove that it wasn't true. But that's a different issue. The law of non-contradiction, identity, non-contradiction, excluded middle, all three of them. I'll do a diatribe about it later in the debate in response to this, because he's going to really try to hammer this point home. It is not merely an intuition, and that's not why we accept it. It is a presupposition that we can't demonstrate is universally true, and yet we can demonstrate that it's true. Just why I used the example of a pen. If I can demonstrate that the pen works, I can't demonstrate that the pen will work forever. As a matter of fact, we have good reason to think that a pen won't work forever.
the same time. And we also have mathematical intuitions, like 5 objects is more than 1 object. There are also
See, here's another example where he's going to pull up something that's an intuition, that 5 objects is more than 1 object. Well, you can certainly have an intuition that 5 objects is more than 1 object. But the issue of 5 objects being more than 1 object isn't something that is merely left to intuition. It may start as an intuition for some, but 5 objects is more than 1 object is a demonstrable, concrete truth that is a fact of reality. And whether or not you recognize it is independent from whether or not it is a fact of reality. And so he's taking things that we can easily demonstrate. Like, it's bizarre. I've got here's more than 1 rubber band. By our definitions of what we mean by more, when we're talking about quantities on a number line, he went to mathematics and quantity to demonstrate an intuition. And that's not an intuition, and certainly not anything that we need to rely on intuition for.
intuitions about the world and history. For example, we all intuitively believe that there's an external world that persists, even if we're not in it. We also intuitively believe that the past was real, and our memories are based on that past reality. We also have natural intuitions about God. Most people in the world and in history believe in spirit beings. According to cognitive science, this belief is biologically rooted. Research shows that children as young as 5 across diverse cultures all express similar beliefs that the universe was created by the supernatural. This is the case even for children in cultures that don't affirm a creator God, like Japanese children. This
So he wants to use this. He's going to make a massive argumentum ad populum fallacy that because he's using intuitions to say that children as young as 5 believe the universe was created by something supernatural. The problem is that children as young as the age of 5 have had 5 years of learning and training and been taught the biases from adults, and they're able to evaluate this is different from this, what makes it different, and they also understand and pick up quickly from adults what sort of answer you give when you don't have a good answer. Children are really good at getting these things. And so when somebody says, hey, if this building was built by your dad and was designed by their dad, who built the earth? Ooh. Well, they don't just invent a God. They don't just intuit a God. They infer down a pathway, down a slippery slope, and they'll do it based on the biases of adults. So the fact that 5-year-olds may suspect that the universe was created by something supernatural, it is neither a demonstration of the reliability of intuition, may not even be a demonstration of intuition, and has nothing to do with whether or not 5-year-olds' thoughts about the universe being created by something supernatural is in any way a demonstration that it's true. And remember, as you continue to listen to Daniel's opening, the first part of this debate is supposed to be, is there good evidence for God? And there will be no evidence presented.
shows that the intuition to believe that the universe was created by supernatural beings is inbuilt. People also naturally believe that the mind persists after bodily death. Belief
Yeah, this is also false when he says this shows that this intuition is inbuilt. No, it doesn't. Inbuilt is a weasel word where you're trying to, it's like saying, well, if God didn't create it, who did? Or let's call it creation because a creation needs a creator. When you say inbuilt, it suggests that someone put this intuition into your head. And what's actually happening there is not a demonstration that some God or being or whatever gave you this intuition, but that in fact you are inferring an explanation based on all of your biases and baggage. And by the time somebody's 5 years old, they have plenty of biases and baggage in this area.
in the afterlife is a biologically rooted intuition. Psychologists call this natural theology. So, to recap, humans have many natural intuitions about what is true. When we rely on those intuitions, that is called intuitive thinking. A good way to think about intuitive thinking is like a tendency to find something plausible or true. If I tell you the world doesn't go away when you close your eyes, most people will tend to believe me, even if I don't present some elaborate argument.
So I think it's funny that he says, even if I don't present some elaborate argument. If you did present an argument, then it would no longer be intuitive. It would be an inference or an induction or a deduction from your elaborate argument. But when you say people tend to intuitively accept your claim that the world doesn't go away when you close your eyes, no. I mean, Daniel's just monumentally wrong. This is not intuition. And the scenario that Daniel's described is he's come up to someone and said, the world doesn't go away when you close your eyes, and that this person intuitively agrees with him. That's not it. That's not what happens in that discussion, and that's not what intuition is anyway. Even if there were intuitions, this debate's still supposed to be about, is there good evidence for God, not do people intuit God. But when you talk about the world doesn't go away when you close your eyes, I don't intuit that. That is an inference or an inductive bit of reasoning that comes from the fact that I've been to sleep many times. I've watched people sleep, and that means that parts of the world that aren't them go on and continue while they're sleeping. People across the board have had many instances of waking up to the same world they went to sleep in, but moved forward by a certain period of time with things clearly having been accomplished while they were sleeping. And they've watched other people fall asleep. They've messed with people while they're sleeping. They've had folks describe watching them while they're sleeping. Now we can film people while they're sleeping. We have sleep lab studies. It's not intuition. It is direct experience coupled with objectively verifiable, independent evidence, and you are making a reasonable inference from it. It's science. Sleep science is a science. Studying people while they sleep. This philosophical notion of how do you know the world doesn't go away when you close your eyes and fall asleep? Well, you can't show that it doesn't pause and then somebody tinkers with it and makes it all look as if you were gone for 6 or 7 or 8 hours or whatever else and then does that. But it's not an intuition. It is an inference that's evidence-based.
The idea just has this inherent plausibility because of our human psychology.
So when he says this idea has an inherent plausibility based on our human psychology, he's almost admitting what I'm talking about. It seems plausible, not because of human psychology in the simple sense, but because our psychology includes all of our experiences and information. When you take your experiences and reach a conclusion about reality based on it, that's not intuition. That's inductive reasoning. Daniel doesn't understand the difference between intuition, inference, and inductive reasoning. It is not merely a product, a natural function of a psychology that stands alone. That psychology is also the result of our experiences.
Now, there's another mode of thinking which is called analytic thinking. Analytic thinking is different because it causes us to question our intuitions rather than just accept things because they feel compelling. We demand further evidence and justification. In other words, analytic thinking is about doubt. We doubt our intuitions and then we explore other possibilities. We gather evidence, we make inferences. We might intuitively feel that eating human flesh is disgusting, but is it actually wrong? Well, let's just gather data and evaluate arguments for each side. This is analytic thinking overcoming intuitive thinking. Both intuitive and analytic thinking are found in human beings, but they're balanced in different ways in different societies. Research shows that intuitive thinking is dominant in some societies and analytic thinking is dominant in others. The other important thing is that when you engage in more analytic thinking, you start doubting more and more of your intuitions.
Daniel's also making a contrast between analytic thinking and intuitive thinking as if it were deductive versus inductive. There's famously the problem of induction, and deductive reasoning is a concrete and absolute. 1 + 1 = 2 for the correct definitions of 1 and plus and equals and 2. But what he's comparing here is analytic and intuitive. Analytic includes inductive and deductive reasoning. Those are both a process of analyzing information, looking for trends, looking for commonality, seeking perhaps causation. That is all there together. Every reliable pathway to understanding things is analytic. The intuitive thing, if you get it right, you have no way to demonstrate it using intuitive reasoning, and we'll get to that more in a little bit.
This is studied in dual process theory. People who have maximized their analytic thinking will doubt their religious, moral, and aesthetic intuitions. Only their strongest intuitions remain. For example, their intuitions about logic or about the external world. But for everything else, they demand empirical evidence. But there is no empirical evidence for these things. So when you maximize analytic thinking, people become more and more inclined to a reductionist view of the world defined by scientific materialism.
So even if people become more inclined toward a reductionist view, that doesn't in any way demonstrate that that reductionist view is incorrect or incomplete. The fact that intuitive, and in this case, he's almost equating intuitive with like contemplative, spiritual-minded thinking, which may or may not be intuitive. That could just also be baggage. I don't know how you demonstrate that any particular thought you had is necessarily intuitive and not the product of some inference or bias that you were reasoned to. But for me, the instinctive kind of intuitive things are like the person who kind of sits down at a piano and runs their hands across it and instantly kind of grasps elements of music theory and how things relate. I could see that being intuitive. I could see that being a sort of natural, oh, I grasp this even though I didn't have to do any reasoning. And yet still, even in those circumstances, you still have interaction and evidence. And you still have cognitive reasoning involved.
And anything beyond that is doubted. Now let's bring it all back. When we have a debate about good evidence for God, what are our standards? Are we trying to meet the standards of a maximally analytic mode of thinking, the type of extreme analytic thinking of atheists? Why should we? Why
Extreme analytic thinking of atheists. Um, uh, this is part of Daniel's biases, and he's going to get into some wackadoodle conspiracy theory stuff a little bit further down the line. A little bit of conspiracy theory thinking in the first part, but much more in the third part and in the Q&A. He wants to portray the atheist position as if we want to dismiss intuitive thinking, and or even if we want to dismiss inference and induction or anything like that. Nothing could be further from the truth. And in my opening statement, which you can go back and listen to, I skipped it so that you wouldn't have to spend 2 hours here. I pointed out that there are plenty of things that we cannot just evaluate from a pure empirical standpoint. We're talking about, you can't get to oughts from an is. And so there are moral questions and things that aren't merely an evaluation of data, empirical data, and yet an evaluation of empirical data can absolutely guide our moral intuitions or guide us in leading us towards better moral conclusions once we have some definition of morality. But he wants to portray this as if the analytic thinking is some form of oppression, and why should we have to have standards of evidence that rises to analytic thinking? Well, Daniel, it's because if you care about what's true, you have to have some mechanism that can reliably lead to truth. And intuition has demonstrated no reliability. You can intuit the truth, but how do you know that your intuition is true? You do that by doubting it, by investigating it, and by using analytic thinking to find out whether or not it's true. Until such time as your subjective intuitions and suspicions have been verified, you have no good reason to think that they're true. You might still believe them, but that's not how sound epistemology works.
Why should we just accept that standard of evidence as opposed to a more balanced type of cognition that doesn't nuke all our natural human intuitions?
See, this is the thing. This is the lie that he tells over and over again. It doesn't. Why should we rely on something that doesn't, that wants to nuke our intuitions, all of our intuitions? That's not what I advocated for. That's not what anybody advocated for. Meanwhile, this is an absolute attack on a straw man version of my epistemology, which still isn't the subject of the debate. So as you'll see, I'm jotting down notes, and every now and then the camera will cut over to me, and I don't actually have that notebook here in front of me. I didn't want to rely on the notes that I took at the moment for this debate review. But if the accusation is that, the atheist is just setting a standard that we can't meet, which he's getting ready to basically say, it's not the atheist who set a standard. It's the people who cared about truth and reason, many of whom were theists. And we stopped being theists when the best methods of analyzing your claims, when we could no longer just rely on intuition or suspicions or gut feelings, and we actually set out to verify, is this something that's believable, failed to meet the burden of proof for theistic claims. So he'd love to paint this as if atheists just existed and manipulated the world. But he also is going to completely misrepresent who atheists are, who secular humanists are, and the reality of history here in just a few minutes.
Atheists will want to claim here is that we should obviously prefer the maximally analytic mode of thinking. Why? Because that's the mode of thinking that's most likely to give us the truth.
So I wouldn't say that necessarily a maximally analytic mode of thinking gets you to the is most likely to result in the truth, because that falls into his trap of saying, they want to nuke all of our intuitions. No. What we want to do is minimize unwarranted intuitions. You may have an intuitive leap that leads you to think that a particular answer is more likely to be true. And you may not be able to explain how and why you reach that conclusion. It may not be the result of reasoning that you're aware of or can address. But the time to believe it and advocate for it is after you've taken that intuition and verified it in the most rigorous ways possible. This is the core of a scientific method, which attempts to remove our biases as much as possible, where we analyze things and then we submit our data and our methods to other people to see if they can get similar results or identical results, or if we have outliers or any number of things. There's a reason that we are advocating for this. Daniel is basically getting ready to say he wants to go back to pre-science days, before we were polluted and poisoned by cognitive colonialism. But I'm jumping the gun a bit.
But is this true? Does maximizing doubt bring us closer to the truth? Why should we believe that? I would challenge atheists to justify this. Why should we adopt such extreme epistemic standards? In reality, a psychology that balances intuitive and analytic thinking is more suitable for recognizing truth. And this is actually...
So balancing is kind of a weasel word, because he suggests that we should maybe be 50-50. I'm fine with having intuitions that we then check. The time to believe things is after we've checked. But he's going to say that a balanced view of some intuition and some analytic thinking is demonstrably better. Here.
Actually an insight that we find within the history of philosophy and the work of Western philosophers like Ludwig Wittgenstein. Not all of reality can be reduced to empirical data points to be scrutinized through systematic analysis. The reality is the reality we all experience is far richer than that. And insisting on maximum analytic thinking actually takes us further from fully seeing reality, like covering up one half of our binoculars. Furthermore, the insistence on maximal analytic thinking is nothing more than a recent product of cultural evolution. For most of history, human cognition was more balanced. So what changed? Analytic thinking became dominant not because it's more attuned to the truth or because it's more beneficial for humanity. Analytic extremism became dominant because of what we can call cognitive colonialism.
Now, I'm gonna play this, but there's a reason why I hadn't written anything down during that last thing, because I'm just basically saying, yeah, where are you going? And by the way, this is still part one. It's still supposed to be him presenting evidence for God. But what he's going to, well, I'm going to let him talk about what he's getting ready to talk about, but he's saying analytic thinking became more dominant, not because it's more attuned to the truth, which is a claim that he makes that he has not, will not, and cannot demonstrate, because analytic thinking is a demonstrable, reliable path to the truth. Science is the single most consistently reliable pathway to understanding reality. There are other ways to potentially know stuff, and there are other ways to potentially investigate stuff, but nothing has demonstrated more reliability than science, which is the pinnacle of analytic methods. And yet he's going to assert that analytic thinking became dominant not because it was attuned to the truth, but...
To understand how this happened, consider society A, that is analytic dominant, versus society B, that is intuitive dominant. Over time, both societies experience technological and economic growth, but society A experiences this faster. This allows society A to dominate society B. Society A then imposes analytic thinking on its newly acquired subjects by establishing an analytic-focused school system. In this way, analytic thinking spreads and dominates more and more societies until it dominates the entire globe. The societies with the most extreme emphasis on analytic thinking win out. That's modern history in a nutshell.
So Daniel's claim is that it's not that analytic thinking is better or more likely to lead you to truth. It's just that those cultures advanced more, dominated the cultures that were relying more on intuition. I guess it sucks to have the superior method of a balanced intuition and then wind up dominated by another culture who did not use your balanced method and were technologically more advanced. But he's like, oh, so group A gets a little more technologically advanced. They then dominate group B, set up schools to teach their analytic heavy method, indoctrinating those, and then they take over the whole world. So all these poor intuitives down here who really have a much better method that isn't any less likely to lead us to the truth, we're just all oppressed because of cognitive colonialism. The ones who learned how to do all these technological things are just oppressing all of these poor little contemplatives and intuitives.
Researchers like Joseph Heinrich have explained this history in books like The Secret of Our Success. Now, the fact that analytic thinking can accelerate technology and growth, that sounds like a great thing. But the
So wait, analytic thinking can accelerate technology and growth. Okay, cool. So analytic thinking has better results when it comes to technology and growth. What else, Daniel?
big question is, just because analytic thinking excels at producing technology, does that mean that maximizing it is better suited to determine truth?
Ah, see, he shifted from better suited for us and progress to better suited for determining truth. And that way he can say there's another type of truth that he can't demonstrate, that he can intuit. Well, I'm sorry, but that's not how truth works. Truth is that which can be demonstrated. Truth is that which is consistent with the facts of reality, and that consistency needs to be demonstrated.
I'm not claiming that analytic thinking has no connection to the truth, but again, when you maximize this type of thinking, that means that your analytic capacities start overshadowing intuitions about the world that are also very compelling. Throughout history, all peoples felt intuitively that there were moral, aesthetic, and religious truths, truths about life and purpose, and many of these truths were based on intuitions that were universally shared by all humanity.
He keeps using the word truth there. People had intuitions about truths, moral truths, these truths, these truths, these truths. Asserting truth over and over again doesn't get you any closer to demonstrating that there's a truth. And there may not be a moral truth. The very notion that you are compelled to intuit a truth does not tell you whether or not there's a truth there at all. Doesn't tell you whether or not there's a truth, doesn't tell you whether or not there's a truth you can reach, and doesn't tell you whether or not your intuition about reaching it is going to be more effective than an analytic method. But what we do know is that when you take intuitions and stack them up against analytic reasoning to evaluate facts about reality, analytic reasoning wins out in every circumstance where you can actually demonstrate the truth, because intuition can't demonstrate anything. It can't demonstrate its effectiveness. It can't even demonstrate that there's a there for it to find.
Now, if you told all these people that they have to reject their intuitions and adopt analytic extremism, which ultimately will bring into doubt all these other intuitions, most people would not accept that. But unfortunately, people don't have a choice. The analytic mode of cognition has been imposed by cognitive colonialism.
So we're forcing people, the atheists, the minority, is forcing people through cognitive colonialism that they must give up their intuitions. I never said that. Secular humanism isn't saying that. Science isn't saying that. Nobody of any, reasonable, I don't even know how to phrase it. I'm not aware of any contingent of the population that is advocating for you throwing out all intuition. But it's like saying, if you want to measure, if you want to like hold your fingers up and measure like that, you can do that. It's not intuition, by the way. It's just not as reliable as actually using a measuring device. I mean, this can be a measuring device. I can look at that and say, you know what, that looks like it's about 2 1/8 maybe inches there. But it would be much better if I had a ruler. It would be much better if I could actually find objectively verifiable data to assess this.
Secular humanist powers have implemented all manner of social and educational programs over the course of the past 300 years to...
This is the biggest lie and conspiracy theory from the first part, which he's going to extend. He just accused secular humanists of imposing a regime of education for the last 300 years when secular humanism hasn't even existed for 100 years. And it has never been in a position of power anywhere. In Daniel's head, secular humanist is anything that is not Muslim. Any Western science-minded, any Western analytic thing, he lumps it all together as secular humanism. Later on, during the Q&A, he'll basically accuse George W. Bush of being a stealth secular humanist. He wants to blame secular humanists for all kinds of things, and it's going to start right now.
champion analytic thinking. Why? Because that's the type of thinking that maximizes economic growth. The more people are thinking analytically, the more they produce science and technology, which will increase GDP. Atheists want to tell the story that
So not only is analytic thinking better at producing technology and growth, but it's also better at producing economic growth. So we have technological growth, economic growth. By the way, the technological growth and economic growth go jointly to other growths like health. All of the various things that increase human lifespans and enrich our lives, and by the way, allow us to create and share art. All of those things come from technology and I suppose economic growth. But here's where we go off the rails even further.
the debate between atheism and religion is about two sides making arguments against each other, and people decide which is more compelling. But there's another way to look at it. Atheists represent an extremist mode of thinking that results in maximizing GDP and military power.
Okay. Atheists represent an extremist regime to maximize GDP and military power. Never mind that the overwhelming majority of atheists, especially those that are secular humanists, are left-leaning. A good chunk of those are pacifists. A good chunk of those are opposed to the military-industrial complex. A good chunk of those are opposed to any sort of conflict like this, not just in a pacifistic sense, but they're not wanting to increase military stuff. And never mind that secular humanists aren't in a position of power anywhere in the world to impose military might and strength. That's left to the world's only remaining superpower, the United States, which, while it is a secular nation on paper, is predominantly run by Christians and with views that are incredibly right-wing, authoritarian, and departing from secular humanism. It is a strange world that Daniel lives in, where he can go from, analytic thinking won the war on reasoning to produce technology, GDP, military might, health, and other benefits, but that doesn't mean it's a good path to truth, and they're just using it to oppress all of us who intuit a God.
The reason that there are so many atheists today is not because the scientific worldview is inherently compelling, rather
The reason there are so many atheists today is not because the scientific worldview is so compelling. He's going to use the word compelling many times today, and I'm going to point out many times it's irrelevant.
maximizing analytic thinking allows you to invent nukes and tanks.
There are so many atheists today because analytic thinking allows you to invent nukes and tanks. I wish they would have cut to me. Maybe they did cut to me. Let's see if they did.
People historically disagreed with maximal analytic thinking, but they were wiped out. Social, technological, economic violence has changed the epistemology of people.
Yeah, I think you can see me sitting there going, am I really going to have to talk about this? He's like, though there were people who were opposed to it, but they were wiped out. Analytic thinking allows you to build tanks, and that's why there's so many atheists. And that's why the secular humanist world is advocating for science, so we can build tanks. Not only is it disgusting to be hearing this lie-filled propaganda screed from someone who wants to move us back to the 11th century so he can marry young girls, but to just sit there and say, I let him dictate everything about this debate, including who got to go first. And to have him sit there and say, you know what, instead of actually presenting evidence for the existence of God in my opening, I'm going to go ahead and give a screed about analytic versus intuitive thinking.
People across the world. Prior to this, no one would have taken atheism seriously, but atheists fail to acknowledge this history. They just assume that analytic thinking should be maximized no matter what. This biases any debate on the existence.
He thinks atheists think that analytic thinking should be maximized no matter what. That's something that I haven't said. That's something that's not part of this debate. And yeah, it's wild. I mean, it's genuinely wild. I'm just sitting there wiping dust off my notepad right now, not bothering to take any notes because I already know what I'm going to say to this.
Existence of God. The theist is always at a disadvantage if he has to mold his arguments to satisfy a mind that's primed to reject anything non-empirical.
He just said the theist is always at a disadvantage as if he has to mold his arguments to fit into a mind that is primed to reject the non-empirical. You could reword this to say, theists are at a disadvantage because we cannot present empirical evidence. We cannot present evidence that should warrant belief. All we can do is intuit these things.
Humans have strong natural intuitions about reality. We have the intuition that there's an external world, that our memories have truth content. There are intuitions that don't give us any more power to do science or produce technology, but that doesn't make them unreal. Intuitions about the existence of God are among the strongest intuitions humans.
This is about the third or fourth time he's mentioned among the strongest intuitions, as if a stronger intuition is in any way a measure of how much more likely it is to be true. The fact that human beings are more strongly convinced of something, it isn't a guidepost to, oh, this one's more likely to be true because we're really, really convinced. Like, oh, I'm sorry. You want me to believe that there's a God? Yeah, I really, really want you to believe there's a God. Well, if you really, really, really want me to believe there's a God, do you really believe there's a God? Oh, I really, 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 really believe there's a God. Well, I guess that's all I needed to hear. Thanks. Congrats. You win.
And this intuition is supported by inferential reasoning and communal traditions. If an atheist says he doesn't find these things compelling, we should ask, where do you get your epistemic standards from? Why shouldn't we believe that those standards are unique to modern Western culture and have only emerged very recently in history, primarily because they maximize GDP?
Yet another fallacy, a lying assertion that this just maximizes GDP. But he's like, oh, if an atheist says they're not going to accept these, we should just ask them, why should we accept your newfangled standards? I don't know, because they're better than the old ones. They're demonstrably better than the old ones. Are you suggesting, well, you are in fact suggesting, Daniel is suggesting he doesn't want to go back. He needs 2 laptops to meet up with my pen and pad. But he actually would like us to go back to the 11th century and, get rid of most new modern scientific advances because he finds them to be anathema to the world that he'd prefer, where men are in charge and women are in bags and subservient and children can be married off, and where you don't have to demonstrate the truth of anything. You just go with your intuitions. Fortunately, for the rest of the world, Islam is a motherlode of bad ideas, and it has no way to demonstrate the truth of those ideas. And that's why it's incredibly frustrating. It's nice of him, though, to admit that theists are at a disadvantage because they can't present evidence that should warrant belief by anyone who cares about the truth.
Why should we take those standards as arbiters of truth about God or anything else?
So you shouldn't necessarily take them as the only arbiter of truth, but they definitely are an arbiter of truth. And when you can demonstrate that your intuition is an arbiter of truth, then your intuition gets included in the methods that we're willing to use. We've now spent 47 minutes in here, and we're just to the debate part with 40 minutes more to go. I'm going to buckle up because it's going to be a while.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. We'll now jump into the open dialogue. So this is for 40 minutes. We'll have open dialogue. If it gets to be too much and that there's too much speaking over each other, then I'll break it into 2 or 1 minute intervals. But let's give it a shot. Gentlemen, the floor is all yours.
So that's an interesting diatribe on the problems of analytic reasoning. Where was the evidence for God? That was the entire first part was, is there evidence of God? And I didn't hear not only any objectively verifiable empirical evidence for God, I didn't even hear any intuitive evidence for God, just a lot about the value of intuition and how evidently as an atheist, I'm all about military power, which I generally despise despite having done 8 years in the military. And that's not consistent with my secular humanism and nothing that I could view as evidence of God.
No, the whole point was to question your standards.
That wasn't the subject of the debate.
Hey, I didn't
Okay.
interrupt you when you...
Correct. So here's what happens. I said, where's the evidence for God? And he admits right off the bat, the whole point was to question your standards. That was an answer to my question, so I started speaking. I wasn't interrupting him. I thought that was the end of his thought. And then he's like, hey, I didn't interrupt you. That's going to come back to haunt him because he's incapable of not repeatedly interrupting. And so I decided right now, in this instant, that every time he interrupts me, I'm going to point it out.
What I said a diatribe. Let's try to be civil here.
I am
I'm
trying
trying
to
to.
be civil. I'm
Then don't
agreeing with
interrupt
you.
me. Then
Well, I
please
don't know
don't
that
interrupt.
interruption is
Don't interrupt
necessarily
me.
uncivil. Okay.
So as I was saying, the whole point of this opening is to question your standards of evidence. If you want to say that, well, there's no scientific evidence, when we do experiments and open the microscope and look at in the beaker, we don't see God, then I can concede that. So what's the point of that point that your opening was about? My opening was to take the discussion to a higher level of what are our standards? What is our epistemology? You're assuming a atheistic epistemology that I don't accept, and the most people in history and even today don't accept.
So I'm not assuming an atheistic epistemology. I'm assuming a sound epistemology, a reliable epistemology that just happens to be consistent with atheism. If in fact there was a God and there was good reason to believe that there was true, then in a debate about evidence for the existence of God, Daniel could have presented evidence for the existence of God instead of whining about how theists are at a disadvantage because they don't have the type of evidence that atheists will accept. It's not like we atheists set up a system for them. What happened is thinkers set up a system of how do we best get to the truth? And it's not the fault of atheism that your theistic claims consistently fail to meet that burden of proof. It's not atheism is here to shut you down. It's I'm not going to accept things that don't meet a certain burden of proof, and you're going to sit there and whine about how you can't meet that burden of proof, and it's all because I care about tanks and guns and bombs and GDP.
That's point number one. As opposed to as for evidence of intuitions that people believe in God, we'll talk about it in the next part of the debate. But this is something that's established. There's a natural theology that is established within the cognitive science of religion, that people have intuitions about spirit beings, they have intuitions about a purpose to creation, they have intuitions about there being an afterlife. These are all things that are established within the cognitive science of religion.
Yeah, the fact is that people have intuitions or they have beliefs about all kinds of things that aren't warranted. Daniel would like to make it pretend. He thinks the intuition is the evidence. And we'll hear that. Is that a pause for me?
Yes.
Cool. So I wanted to do a debate on Islam versus secular humanism and which one's better for the world, but Daniel didn't want that. And then James kept coming back to me with potential topics for a debate. And I pointed out various problems with them and everything else. And then finally I gave up. And just the 3 different topics that he wanted over 3 hours is what I agreed to. And so I'm given a list of topics. And topic 1 is there evidence of God? I rest my case because he just said that the entire purpose of his opening was to question my epistemology. I am irrelevant, and my epistemology is irrelevant to whether or not there is evidence of God. And if you demand that the first hour be on is there evidence for God, and you do not address that topic and admit that instead you've decided to go with a different topic, you have defaulted, and I rest my case. And there you go. We could probably stop the video right there. I'm not going to, because there's a bunch more that happened, of course, in the first hour, because we're only like we're less than halfway through the first hour right now. This was important to make sure I was clear, because in the process of negotiating and setting up for debate, you're talking about what subjects do you want to address. And I was like, let's do secular humanism versus Islam, which is better, for the world. And Daniel flat out refused, didn't want to do that. He suggested topics, and he suggested some flawed topics, demonstrating his flawed understanding, same reason he doesn't understand the difference between intuition and inference and induction, among the many other things, like when I explained to him here in a little bit about the law of non-contradiction. He wanted to do, is Islam true, but do it in the guise of 3 things that don't point to Islam being true and can't point to Islam being true, but can lead you to intuit or incorrectly infer through fallacious reasoning that Islam is true. Oh, Islam is incredibly compelling. Well, okay.
No, it's the same exact topic. If you have a debate topic, part of the debate is to analyze the topic and the assumptions that go into one position or another.
So he's literally saying, when I called him out, he says, it's the same exact topic. No, it's not. You didn't present any evidence for the existence of God. You didn't present evidence good or bad or intuitive or analytic or otherwise. So for you to say it's the same topic is just a lie.
I'm analyzing the assumptions that go into the first sentence or the second sentence that you had was that this kind of scientific analysis is the best route to truth. I am objecting to that and proposing an alternative. Well, how about you explain to us and justify why it's the best route to truth?
Because the subject of the debate is there evidence of God?
Yeah, how do we determine that? You're asserting that it has to be scientific evidence.
The subject of the debate is there evidence for God? My answer is no. And I talked about what sort of evidence I would accept or not accept. I didn't say anything at all about shutting down intuition. I didn't say that intuition should be sidelined or less important, or
You
that it
did.
has or that it has no. I thought we were done interrupting. Or that. So, this isn't the first time, but I made a note to myself to point out every time he interrupts me, because I get accused of doing it, and I do it. Absolutely. I don't think I did it the first time when he decided to jump in and suggest it, but I absolutely interrupt people on the show, and for very good reasons, I think. But if you're going to whine about the first time I interrupt, I'm going to point out every single time you do it, pretty much. It has no importance. I didn't do any of the things that he asserted, and not only did he not present any evidence of God for us to address, but he fully acknowledged that was not the purpose of his opening statement. I rest my case.
Where's the evidence that the external world exists?
That's not the subject of the debate either.
I want to know, like, your standards of evidence for God, do they have any meaning outside of that particular question in the very specific way?
I don't have standards of evidence, by the way, for the existence of God. I have standards of evidence for any claim. That's it. That's what Daniel doesn't understand. He thinks that I have special evidence for the existence of God, and yet I don't have it. He's like, so where's the evidence for the existence of the external world? I don't have, my evidence is that I experience a world. I assume that it's external for a number of different reasons, but I can't demonstrate that the external world exists. So Daniel dishonestly is saying, how do you solve the problem of hard solipsism, instead of, here's my evidence for God?
That you've defined it to set the debate up in your favor? Is there anything else that is scientific?
This was another huge lie on Daniel's part, suggesting that I'm setting the debate up in my favor. I literally tried to get subjects that would be good. I literally objected to his topics and tried to suggest better ones. I accepted every single thing that he wanted, every topic that he wanted. I even let him decide who went first. The notion that I set this debate up to favor me is one of the most, like, if it weren't such a trivial piece of BS, it would be the most disgusting lie in the debate.
Scientifically verifiable, like the external world.
Yes.
Like the principle of non-contradiction. Please give me the evidence, the objectively verifiable evidence that the law of non-contradiction is true.
That's not the subject of this debate either. And after being accused of setting this up so that it would be easy for me to win, after acknowledging he chose these topics that I did not want to address, and now it turns out that he also does not want to address, I don't know what to do. James?
No, there's plenty of evidence. There's plenty of, if you ask people for evidence, if you ask people for evidence of God, they will point to their sense that God exists. There
you go. If you ask people for evidence of God, they will point to their sense that God exists. Daniel thinks that by saying people believe and people will tell you they sense God, that he has presented evidence that God exists. He's wrong. This is evidence that people believe, and it's evidence that people claim to sense God. But claiming to sense God is no more evidence that you did sense God than claiming to have seen a ghost is evidence that you saw a ghost. Claiming to see anything. This subjective experience of you portraying or stating what your subjective experience is, isn't evidence that your subjective experience is correct or true.
Will point to their sense that when they look at the world, they see it as being created by a supreme being for a purpose. When you ask people about any number of things that are not scientific, they will have a tendency to answer in specific ways. These are studied within the cognitive science of religion and psychology generally. If you ask people for evidence of the external world or basic arithmetic propositions, there's a tendency to answer in consistent ways in a universal fashion. What this tells us is that the human mind has a certain structure, it works in a certain way. And we have to understand the human mind in order to ask questions about morality, religion, aesthetics,
I agree that we need to understand the human mind. If Daniel did understand the human mind and he understood the difference between a logically valid and sound argument and merely an assertion about someone's internal report of what they've experienced, then maybe we wouldn't be having this debate. But yeah, it's important to understand the human mind.
Logic, mathematics, all of these, science, right? Empirical data, all of these.
Here's the thing to ask, Daniel, since it's important for us to understand the human mind. Will we understand it better using analytic thinking or intuition? My claim is that we can, will, and have a better understanding of the human mind through analytic thinking, scientific inquiry and investigation than by intuiting. Our intuitions lead us to things that don't have demonstrable evidence for them. The notion that a self is somehow tied to a ghost in the machine or a soul, something that's not only we haven't been able to demonstrate it reliably, we have strong evidence against the claim. The fact that every single part of our everything that we would identify as a function of a soul is an identifiable and malleable function of a brain.
These things have to be understood with reference to human psychology. So it's not irrelevant to the debate. It's actually a core first step of being able to debate evidence for anything, let alone evidence for God.
So what we just heard was that if you ask people, they'll tell you that they believe in a God. Some of them may even say they intuit it. I'm still asking and still waiting for a demonstration of evidence for God. That's evidence that people believe in God. And if you just said, hey, I want to debate whether or not people believe in God, I'd say, why would we do that? I clearly agree that people believe in God. I used to believe in God, but I didn't do it necessarily because of intuition, although some people might do it for intuitional reasons. Some people might think that they're doing it for good evidence reasons. But when I found out that I didn't have good evidence, and when I found out that intuitions could be wrong, and if you're going to have intuitions about, oh, I don't know, whether or not the restaurant's going to be busy, that's probably based on past experience and data that you're just using your gut to assess. And so what you're describing as potentially intuition there isn't actually intuition, but it's based on data. But we don't have any data that I'm aware of for God. We don't have any evidence that I'm aware of for God. You haven't presented any, and that's the subject of the first hours of debate.
Intuitions are evidence. Intuitions are evidence. Just because you don't accept them, that doesn't mean that they're not evidence. There are different types of intuitions. I didn't say all intuitions are equally compelling. There are some intuitions that are
There's the word compelling again.
so compelling that
Whether or not something's compelling is a measure of whether or not someone will believe it. That's completely independent from whether or not they have good reason to believe it or whether or not they have evidence to believe it. Evidence are facts that are consistent with a proposition.
no one has questioned them for most of human history, like the intuition that there's an external world, for example, or the intuition.
See, this is what's happening here. The intuition that there's an external world. What he's trying to do, and he'll build this up over and over and over again, and he's going to ask me a question or two multiple times, and I'm going to refuse to answer it because it's not the subject of the debate. Is it wrong to harm people without reason? Give me your justification for the law of non-contradiction. Give me your justification for an external world. And then he's going to use the tu quoque fallacy, which is to suggest if Matt believes things without good evidence, then he can't complain about me not having good evidence for my God belief. Sorry, but that's the subject of this debate. You are here to present your evidence for God. You picked that subject, and what I believe and why is completely irrelevant. But also, he's wrong, as I explained several times coming up. I believe things for good reasons. As I point out, there are some things that I could be wrong about, some things where I'm wrong about whether the reasons are good, but generally speaking, I'm not going to become convinced of something until there's a good reason. I just wouldn't let him spin the debate into, is it okay to harm someone without reason over and over and over again, and several other attempts to dangle red herrings in front of me. I kept going back to, what's the evidence for God?
Regarding the law of non-contradiction, certain moral intuitions, like it is wrong to harm people. People have universally had this intuition. Why? Because every moral system, every religion that we see has this principle in it.
So he just asserted that people intuit that it's wrong because religions have that principle in it. No, that's incredibly confused. First of all, if you believed something because a religion says so, that's not an intuition. That's you following an instruction. If religions have this concept that it's wrong to harm people without a reason, you're not intuiting that. You are receiving and accepting instruction. So once again, Daniel doesn't understand intuition at even the basic level. He doesn't know how to make an argument at a basic level. And he doesn't know how to present evidence at a basic level or any other level. And so when he says that people intuit this because these religions have it, no, that's not the reason. And by the way, to whatever extent you could say, I intuit that it's wrong to hurt people without a reason, it's because I'm an empathetic creature who would rather not be hurt without a reason. It doesn't take any sort of, intellectual leap or robust epistemology to say, you know what, that hurt. I'd rather not have that happen again. It's in my best interest to make sure that I'm discouraging this for everybody else so that it doesn't wind up becoming acceptable, so that it doesn't come back to point to me. Why should we not kill people? Because I'd rather not end up dead. Why should we not steal people? Because I'd rather not have my stuff taken. Why should we not hurt people? Because I'd rather not be hurt. This is the basics of empathy. This is the basics of utter selfishness as it expands out in a proper game theory setting of tit for tat, of which game theory models are most effective. And game theory, by the way, is reasoning, not intuition. Daniel doesn't even seem to know what intuition is. He's so desperate to say, I can't provide evidence for God. I'm just going to go with us intuiting it and pretend like I've presented evidence. No, your fact has to be consistent with the reality. And so the temptation is to say, yes, if there is a God, people might believe in that God. True. But if people can believe in God, whether there's a God or not, just like you might think that Trump won the election, whether he did or not. Your belief is independent. Your belief is not a fact that establishes the truth of your belief. The claim is not itself the evidence of that claim. A claim can be evidence for other claims. Certainly, a claim is evidence for the fact that you made a claim. It's not evidence that what you're claiming is true. Daniel doesn't get that.
In it, implicitly or explicitly, that it is wrong to harm people without reason. That is evidence of its truth insofar as the human mind is capable of accessing the truth. That's the point.
So he's once again saying that because people intuit it, that's evidence for the truth. No, what it's evidence of, Daniel, is that you're not a very good thinker. Sorry, I don't care anymore at this point. If you sit down and evaluate, why should I be opposed to people harming people? It's because I am included in the group of people, and I want a better world for me and the people that I love. And that means that I need to be in favor of a better world for all people. I need to be in favor of a world that treats you better. I need to be in favor of a better world that treats everybody better. It's not like there's some truth there. It's not like, oh, this is 2 + 3 = 5. It's not like there's a rock in my backyard that's worth $5. None of those things are similar to my assessment and my empathy. And by the way, secular humanism, as I did a robust defense of secular humanism in a couple different debates, includes advocating for empathy and art and all kinds of things.
And the belief in God is also one of these very strong intuitions that human beings have that they develop from childhood. So that is evidence. You don't accept it as evidence.
Yes. And neither should you, and neither should anybody else. And if somebody came in and said, hey, there are people who intuitively think there is no God, is that then evidence that there is no God? No, it's evidence that people think. See, I'm the one with a consistent worldview. If somebody believes there's a God, that is no more evidence for a God than the fact that somebody believes there isn't a God is evidence against that God. That doesn't count. You're talking about what people are convinced of. And because you happen to find it compelling, there's a difference. And you did this at the beginning when you're like, oh, we need to ask compelling for whom? No, it's not about who finds it compelling. It's about what should anyone find compelling? What should anyone find compelling? Sound evidence, verifiable, objective, independent evidence consistent with the facts that warrant accepting a conclusion. The very notion that you could just, well, you know what? There's a lot of people who believe in God, and that's a whole lot of evidence for God. No, that's an argumentum and populum fallacy. That is an appeal to the popularity of an idea. It's a logical fallacy. Well, logical fallacies are just analytic thinking. I'm an intuitive thinker. How dare you foist your analytic thinking on me? Okay, I'm not foisting anything on you. You can still be an intuitive thinker, but you don't get to to tell, well, you get to tell people whatever you want, but you don't actually have evidence from your intuition. You don't. Intuition needs to be checked and verified by the analytic thinking. Sorry.
That's my point.
Boy, have I got some surprises for you. Daniel seems to think that nobody's questioned reality. I don't evidently you've never heard of solipsism. And the
For most of
various
history was
Are
what
you
I said.
interrupting me again?
Yeah. That's actually kind of fun to do the, are you interrupting me again?
What's good for the goose? Solipsism, and the study of this within philosophy, is something that is robustly argued all over. It's almost argued more than whether or not atheists can be rocks or whether or not tacos are sandwiches. Solipsism is the issue of, can we trust? And do we know that the outside world that we think is the outside world that we experience, is it the real true world? And as far as I'm aware, there is no solution to the problem of hard solipsism. But when you say that people's intuitions about God count as evidence, as I was pointing out, whether you're going to have objectively verifiable facts or objectively verifiable empirical evidence or not, at a minimum, the evidence that you have, that you demonstrate someone's intuition, if you want to claim that's evidence, you have to make a demonstration to show how that intuition is consistent with a specific God concept and excludes other God concepts, and how we can demonstrate that it is probably correct.
I realize that right now I'm saying the things I just said to you all, and that we're well over an hour. The only reason I don't stop here and just say, hey, the rest of this was nonsense, is because somebody's gonna be like, well, that doesn't address what Daniel said. So we're going to finish the whole thing.
And you haven't done any of that. You've just asserted that
We're going to finish the first hour in this video, and then we'll do the rest in the other videos.
people have intuitions about God and that we shouldn't dismiss them. I didn't say we should.
Sorry, you've asserted from the beginning in your opening statement that the route, I think you used the word route, to understanding reality and truth is through this kind of scientific analytic investigation.
No, what I said was that scientific methods are the most consistently reliable path to truth that we have. I didn't say it was the path.
What do you want?
You asserted that. You asserted that. So why can't you just justify that? Why can't you tell us why we should accept that standard?
Because the first hour of this debate is not, is Matt's epistemology sound? Is there evidence?
Yes, it is.
It,
The
no,
whole
it's,
debate.
no, it's
The whole
not.
the whole
no, it's
debate
not.
is
No,
about
it's
who's
not. No, it's not. No,
Yes,
it's
it is.
not.
Yes,
No,
it
it's
is.
not. No, it's not.
Yes, it
Keep
is.
up.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Meanwhile, what I said is that scientific inquiry is the most consistently reliable pathway to demonstrably understanding reality. I didn't say that intuition couldn't get you to the right answer. Intuitions need to be demonstrated in their reliability because the wise person, as Hume would teach us, proportions their confidence to the evidence. You can have intuitions and they might be right, but the way to be confident and the way for them to count as good evidence is to show that they are probably right. So asserting that people have intuitions doesn't make them evidence. It doesn't make them reliable. And it doesn't mean that people's intuitions about whether the God is a Christian God, a Scientologist God, a Hindu God, a Muslim God, or some other God that nobody's proposed as any demonstration that it's likely to be correct.
Yeah, Daniel interrupted to say, yes, that is what the debate's about. It's about competing epistemologies. No, this one is about using our competing epistemologies to evaluate the evidence that you present. But Daniel didn't present any evidence. He presented the claims. He's yet another person, and it's not just Muslim apologists that do this. It's a bunch of Christian apologists too, who think that the claims are in fact evidence for them, for the claims themselves. They're not. You guys are incredibly confused. They're not. It's not just that they're not sufficient to warrant belief. They aren't on their own evidence of anything other than you made a claim. Anyone can say anything. The mere utterance is not evidence. How that utterance compares to reality, that is the evidence that allows you to make a determination about whether or not it's true. If you say something where there's no possibility of determining whether or not it's true, you've said something that is absolutely useless.
And this hour of the debate is supposed to be about evidence of God. I still am waiting.
So your standard of evidence takes out all moral claims, moral truths, I'll say, actually, because I do believe it is a moral truth.
It doesn't, yeah, he corrected right there, because it doesn't take out moral claims. It does take out moral truths, because there may not be moral truths.
That harming others for no reason is wrong. I can't demonstrate that. I can't bring you peer-reviewed studies to establish that. I do believe that the law of non-contradiction is true. I can't bring you scientific evidence for that. I can't demonstrate that in a proof. I do believe that the external world exists. I cannot demonstrate.
He's also trying to pretend that all analytic thinking is the rough equivalent of putting things in a beaker scientifically. I can't give you peer-reviewed science that this is, morally true. Okay? I didn't ask for that. He's both asking and answering the questions in order to set up a scenario where he can pretend like I didn't answer relevant questions when that wasn't the case.
demonstrate that through a proof. I can't bring you scientific evidence for that. All of those things and much more. Basic mathematical truths, basic aesthetic truths, like eating human flesh is disgusting. That
Basic mathematical truths, basic aesthetic truths. He's saying he can't provide any evidence for mathematical truths and that they're on a par with eating human flesh. And that's how absolutely far Daniel has to bend over backwards. I can, look, this is one rubber band, and this is a rubber band. And when I put these two together, this hand is now holding two rubber bands. This is a foundation of not just mathematical truth, but it's also foundations for logical truths. Identity, the rubber band. Each rubber band has its own identity. Together, they are a collection where we have a quantity, which we can then do a sum of those. To pretend that math is on a par with, gosh, why shouldn't we eat people? Or is there a God? Is how much has religion poisoned your ability to think when you can multiple times put math, cannibalism, and God into a little package as if they are all in the same category or about the same thing at all?
is a truth, and I will stand by that. But there's no scientific result that will say that that is true. But it is true. That is reality. We all have these universal.
So he's asserting X is true, but I can't prove it. X is true, but I can't prove it. This is true. It's a truth. It's a truth we all know. That's not how truth works, Daniel. Truth is demonstrated, not asserted.
Truths that we abide by in understanding reality, but none of that has to do with scientific evidence. None of that has to do with having this kind of deductive proof. Yet it's.
I didn't say it had to be a deductive proof. I'm fine with inductive proofs, which are also analytic and not intuitive. Deductive, inductive, Daniel can't do anything.
Still true, yet it's still a reality. What the atheist does, and in general, not just math.
What the atheist does in general.
The atheist says that, well, none of that is really real. And we don't need to talk about that. Let's just talk about what is scientific. But
I'm happy to talk about it. I've been talking about it for years. My talking about it is that if you're going to admit that you can't demonstrate it's real, you don't get to whine about me saying it's not real.
this is a drastic, violent limitation on reality that the vast majority of humanity, not only today, but throughout history, doesn't share.
So he just accused atheists of having a drastic, violent epistemology that they're foisting onto the vast majority of reality who don't share this limitation. That's an argumentum ad populum, yet another appeal to popularity fallacy by saying, you don't get to foist your reasoning onto everybody else. Hey, look, I'm sorry that your claims don't meet good standards of evidence, but that's your fault, not mine. I present claims that I can meet the burden of proof on. I can talk about things in terms of their standards of evidence. I don't have a special standard of evidence for gods. Every claim comes in, I analyze it based on what it actually says.
People don't have this scientific reductionist view of reality.
So if you go back to the beginning of my opening statement, not the Mitch McConnell joke, which was really good, by the way, but if you go back to the beginning where I was describing things, in addition to talking about the nature of evidence and everything else, I think I specifically pointed out that there are things where we're not going to be able to point to empirical evidence. And I think I used morality as an example for that. To suggest that I am tossing those things out is not remotely accurate. And I guess you just missed part of my opening. But my opening was about evidence of God, not about competing epistemologies. So I'm still waiting.
Well, the difference is when it comes to morality, I'll stand up and say, this is true. And it's not something that I can doubt. If I doubt it, I doubt my reality.
So he's not allowed to doubt his reality, is what he's saying. He just proclaims that something is true, and even though he acknowledges he can't demonstrate its truth, and yet he wants to question my epistemology?
But your position, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that morality is something that we can't have objectively verifiable facts about. Our positions are not the same on morality.
That's not true. There are objectively verifiable facts about morality, just not necessarily for the foundation of what position is morally correct.
My position is shared by the vast majority of human beings.
No, Daniel, your position of allowing for Sharia law and child brides is absolutely not shared by the majority of human beings.
No one even questions that. That's people's reality.
I doubt reality.
And he says, he's like, nobody even questions it. That's reality. This is not only an appeal to popularity, but it's a just so fallacy. This is just the way it is.
I doubt many things that I intuitively feel about reality. And yes, our view on morality is very different, with something I'm sure we'll get to in a little while, which everybody's already aware of. When it comes to moral truths, or let's say the law of non-contradiction, identity, non-contradiction, and excluded middle, the foundations of logical thinking, are presuppositions. We can't demonstrate that they're true because you'd have to assume that they're true to try to prove they're false, which means they're not falsifiable. However, what we can do is demonstrate that they consistently seem to be inviolate. That means there doesn't seem to be anything that breaks those rules. But we don't have an exhaustive understanding of the universe. And so beginning as a practical, necessary assumption to say, I would like to reason, these are the foundations of reason that I'm going to begin with, identity, non-contradiction, excluded middle, and they continually, consistently demonstrate to be true and reliable and have never been shown to not be, it is a reasonable intuition or inference or presupposition that we should continue to use them until such time as somebody demonstrates, hey, we found a problem with identity, non-contradiction, excluded middle. And now you have to rethink whether or not you can use them as a foundation. But until then, it's like, you know what? I rolled a dice and I rolled it over and over again, and I calculated the probabilities, and this dice consistently conforms to the reliabilities. But it might be the case that angels are picking the number that shows up on the dice every single time, and they're just doing it consistent with the probabilities that I understand. And any day now, that angel could just turn it to something else. So I better not, I don't have any foundation for probability. Bullshit. We have loads of foundation for probabilities. We have loads of reason to think that something is true. What we don't have a way to demonstrate is that it's impossible for it to be otherwise.
He's going to demonstrate right here that he doesn't understand falsifiability, because I just got done saying non-contradiction, not falsifiable. It's the foundation of logic. It's a presupposition. And he's going to, well, here.
Yeah, so how would you falsify the principle of non-contradiction?
How would you falsify the thing you just said was unfalsifiable?
Asserted, it just literally said you cannot falsify.
And how is it false? So it's not up to be falsifiable. Correct. So why do you say it seems to work? As if
Daniel doesn't understand that something can work consistently in one area, and another aspect of it can be unfalsifiable. That non-contradiction is true, is undeniable, and demonstrable. The issue is it always true everywhere under all circumstances? And that is the part that's unfalsifiable.
There's going to be a future point where it's not going to work, and therefore it will be falsified.
Am I speaking English? I said these things are unfalsifiable. They are presuppositions that continually demonstrate that they are true. There's no reason to think that they could be violated in the future, but you can't demonstrate that. And so it is a presupposition. I am as convinced as I can be of anything that the foundations of logic are reasonable, but you can't prove it. This is the foundational problem of logic.
Then why do you accept it?
Because, oh my gosh, if I pick up a pen and I try and write with it, and it writes every time I pick it up and write with it, then I'm going to view that pen as reliable right up until it stops being reliable. That's the same thing for identity, non-contradiction, excluded middle. Those things have continued to demonstrate that they seem to be.
Look at his face, and you're getting ready to see that he can't even understand the basics of an analogy. I'm using the pen to say when I use the pen, just like when I use logic, I consistently get good results. Nothing ever seems to make this pen not work. Nothing ever seems to make logic not work. That's the analogy. Daniel is absolutely befuddled and is about to demonstrate it very clearly right here.
And it's not an empirical thing. It's not an empirical thing. How can you demonstrate something that's not empirical?
How can you demonstrate something that's not empirical? The same way you can with mathematics. The same way you can with quantity. All of these things are demonstrable just because they're not an empirical fact that you can observe and put in a beaker. These things are still demonstrable. It's like once you've bought in to the nonsense that Daniel has, it's like you stop being able to even understand a basic analogy that I'm going to use this pen and I'm going to keep using this pen until it's no longer useful. is this pen going to last me my entire life? It might, because I don't know how much I'm going to write with a pen. Is it going to last forever? Probably not, and I have good evidence that it won't. What's the issue with, for example, a sun? How long is the sun going to burn? Well, we actually know enough now where we could calculate it, but once upon a time we couldn't. And so it was a reasonable position to think that the sun is going to burn forever. Why would you think that it wouldn't? It's every single day you've woken up, it's been there, it's going to be there forever. That is a reasonable inference until such time as there's actual evidence that shows that your reasonable inference is wrong. And then you say, well, it's not going to burn forever, but it's going to burn for some limited time. Until somebody demonstrates that identity, non-contradiction, excluded middle are somewhere, somewhen, somehow broken, then the normal, reasonable assumption is that this is going to continue to work. And it should continue to work right up until it doesn't. And that doesn't may never happen. I don't know why. It's sad to see how religion has poisoned some people's brains to the point where they cannot even, I mean, he's going to accuse me of a category mistake, which is incredibly ironic.
Didn't say.
How can you demonstrate that harming someone is wrong? Like, is there going to be a future point where we discuss?
He just shifted from the non-contradiction and my pen analogy to saying it's not empirical. How do you demonstrate that harming someone is wrong? So he's trying to go back to this notion of moral truth, which I may reject anyway, and isn't in the same category as logic. I accept that logic is inviolate until such time as there's a reason to think that it's not. I don't accept that there's a moral absolute truth that is external in that sense.
Discover, actually, harming people for no reason is not wrong. It's actually good. It's not an empirical thing. Like, you're making a category mistake. Like, these are not.
The irony that he made that category error while he was accusing me of making a category error is really thick.
Non-empirical things, but you're applying this empirical standard of falsifiability to everything. This is just a basic category mistake.
So he's saying falsifiability does not apply to things that aren't empirical. Falsifiability is itself a concept, which is relatively new. And he should go read Karl Popper on the subject.
So everybody pay attention to what's happening.
This grandstanding is
Grandstanding.
ludicrous. Are you speaking English?
So now that he's accused me of something and he's been exposed as not understanding, the second I try to answer this question, he's like, you're grandstanding instantly.
I'm sorry.
People understand me.
Rewind it. I literally
You
have
don't
to say
need
the same
grandstand.
thing
Just
twice.
answer the question. Your principle of
Right,
falsifiability.
you don't get to determine. You don't get to decide what
Just
question I
answer the
answer and what question I don't
Yeah, I do.
answer.
Yeah,
and
I
what's
do.
actually
I'm
happening
doing it right
here,
now.
you can, but you're an ass. What's
Oh.
happening right? Yes, you are.
Oh, you're hurting my feelings.
I know.
You're breaking my heart.
Wait till we get to the other problems. So what's happening here is I explained it, and then I explained it again. And when he didn't have an answer, he instead tried to shift the topic to, is harming people wrong? Are we going to find out that someday harming people is not wrong? And then he shifted that topic to, is harming people for no reason wrong? When that's not the subject of this debate, it is not the subject of this hour debate, and it is not what we were talking about. Are you going to be able to stay on topic and eventually present some evidence of God, or are you going to keep grandstanding and deflecting and pulling up topics that we weren't talking about?
So if you apply the standard of falsifiability, that's exactly what's in question. That's what the whole opening was about, questioning that standard of scientific evidence is the arbiter of truth.
So he wants there to not be falsifiability. At first, when I heard him say this, he's like, that's what the whole thing was about. When I'm like, you have an intuitive argument for God that's not falsifiable, but his objection is to falsifiability itself. Because if you get rid of falsifiability, which is a cornerstone of reasoned thought and scientific inquiry, well, then there's one less objection against his intuitions.
Haven't addressed that at all. You just grandstand to the audience, and then you keep saying that, well, we don't have evidence for God. Yes, I know, that's the question. That is the debate topic, but we're trying to analyze, what does evidence actually...
I listened to him. He just said, you just keep saying we don't have evidence for God. And he said, yes, I know. Once again, admitting we don't have evidence
actually
for
mean?
God.
What are standards of evidence that are required? I say that intuitions that human beings have universally from childhood are evidence for God, insofar as we can understand truth, insofar as we can understand reality. That is evidence. You don't accept that as evidence. And you say that, well, this is not objectively verifiable. And I ask you, why is it not objectively verifiable? You say,
Why is it? No, you didn't ask me why it's not objectively verifiable. It's not objectively verifiable because it's subjective. It is a personal intuition. And whether or not the claim is verifiable is not a matter of intuition. It's a matter of analytic investigation. A verifiable claim is not merely somebody said it, therefore it's true. The verification process is the thing that's analytic, and that's what Daniel doesn't understand.
Say, well, this is not something that's empirical or scientific. Why would we ever accept this? And then I say, well, what about all these other things that you accept, that you seemingly accept, but they...
Yep. At least he's acknowledging. And then I go through all the other things in your worldview, or that I think is in your worldview, that you accept that I don't think are falsifiable. And I want you to justify them, because he's trying to do a Tukul-K fallacy of, hey, my intuition about God is no less justified than Matt's position on something else, which I've already pointed out isn't true and isn't accurate.
They don't have that standard of proof, yet you accept them. Do you accept that there's an external world? Do you accept that harming someone for no reason is wrong? Do you accept that, even though you don't?
I don't know. So I have no problem accepting that there is an external world until such time as somebody demonstrates that there's not, because that's what I directly experience, and that seems to be the experience of everybody else. And it would be absurd to think that I am sitting here arguing with myself, that I am coming up with the stupid, confused, I don't understand falsifiable stuff that Daniel is presenting. That's my main argument against hard solipsism. Can't demonstrate it, but it's not just I intuit that there's a real world. It seems preposterous for me to have written every good song, every bad song, every good argument, every bad argument, or that I'm a brain in a vat and somebody else is feeding it into me, which means there's another reality out there. So in either one of those cases, I am not the entirety of the world, and hard solipsism is not something that I can demonstrate is true, or that I can demonstrate is not true. But the practical necessity is that I have to operate as if I exist in a real world. I don't have to operate as if Islam is true. I don't have to operate as if Christianity is true. I don't have to operate as if Scientology is true. And the obvious demonstration of this is that Daniel doesn't act like all those things are true, despite the fact that they are all subject to intuitions.
Don't have any empirical proof. So why won't you accept that God exists?
So I was just accused of saying, why would we accept it if it's not empirical? When I just finished explaining that identity, non-contradiction, excluded middle are not only not falsifiable, but are an example of the thing I highlighted at the beginning of my opening about things that are not based on empirical evidence. I didn't address the question at all about whether or not I think there's an objective world that we're experiencing. So Daniel is arguing against a fictional straw man of me and still presenting no evidence of God.
You accept law of non-contradiction.
Yes.
Why? Where's the empirical evidence?
Because where's the empirical evidence? As I've explained now 4 times.
It's something that's not empirical. That's my point.
Correct. Correct.
So then there can't be any empirical evidence for it, yet you accept it.
I didn't say there couldn't be any empirical evidence for it, but that's not why I accept it.
What could be?
He confuses the fact that the concept isn't empirical to that there can't be empirical evidence that supports it. And I'm going to explain that again now too.
Let me answer, or are you going to talk over me again? I explained why I accepted it, because it continually demonstrates its reliability. And I also pointed out that I accepted initially as a presupposition, because there is no way to demonstrate identity, non-contradiction, excluded middle are always true, but there is a way to show that they are true in every example that we can come up with. You can do this with a simple Venn diagram to show that A, not A, and everything is either A or not A, and nothing is both A and not A. This is what a single Venn diagram with a single circle demonstrates. Come up with an example that suggests or shows that identity, non-contradiction, or excluded middle aren't true. Come up with an example where they're not true, and I'll stop believing them. I'll stop believing that they are going to continue to be reliable, because now you'll have demonstrated that there's a circumstance where they're not reliable. But much like the pen, until there's a demonstration that this is going to not be reliable at some point, which for pens we know, but until that time, I'm justified in continuing to use logic as a presupposition that continues to demonstrate its viability and its reliability. I said nothing at all about why should we believe something if it's not empirical. I did not say at any point that science is the only way to knowledge and understanding. What I said is the most consistently reliable, demonstrable pathway to an accurate model of reality. If you're not going to address what I actually said, could you finally present some evidence of God?
You're contradicting yourself. You keep saying that.
So once again, I wanted to point out that we're still avoiding the subject of the debate. This is important. It's not enough just to run logical circles around Daniel. That part's easy. to show that, and continue to reiterate that he's not actually defending the proposition that he asked for in this debate is important. Somebody's going to have to walk away with that, even if they don't understand other things.
Well, this is non-empirical, the law of non-contradiction.
He says I'm contradicting myself because this is not empirical. There's no contradiction in my position. The fact that the law of non-contradiction isn't empirical doesn't mean that you can't demonstrate its reliability using empirical evidence, using empirical facts about the world. Daniel's confusing the ontology with the, well, we'll set that aside.
Prediction is non-empirical, but you're still waiting for a demonstration that can happen later in time, meaning an empirical event.
So he thinks I'm waiting for a demonstration. I'm not sitting here going, gosh, someday somebody's going to show this doesn't work. What I'm saying is when somebody shows that there's a circumstance under which it doesn't work, that's when I'll believe that. Because that itself is a claim. Any claim, hey, the law of non-contradiction, it won't work under this circumstance. Cool, thank you for demonstrating that. Now my belief or my acceptance of the reliability of the law of non-contradiction has been amended to exclude that circumstance. This shit is really easy.
This is a contradiction in what you're saying. We can get more specific with the issue of harm. Is harming someone for no reason wrong? That is something, are you waiting for...
He was desperate to get me to answer this, and we won't find out till later exactly why, but he, like several other people, he's absolutely vile and dishonest. He's going to advocate for child brides and slaughtering anybody who mocks the prophet and all kinds of stuff like that. He desperately wants me to address this question because he thinks he's found another contradiction in my worldview. Just like when Andrew decided to lie about what he was willing to defend in a debate in order to try and call me out on gender issues and trans issues, which I've already addressed in other videos as well.
Future event, can you explain like something that could happen or when it could be demonstrated that harming someone for no reason is morally right?
No, I could not demonstrate to you under those circumstances. We'd have to have a lengthy discussion about what you mean by for no reason. What all reasons are you excluding? Yeah. And even if there's no way that I can come up with a demonstration or even a hypothetical demonstration of when it could be wrong, that does not mean that one doesn't exist. This is another problem with Daniel. He's like, you're willing to believe the law of non-contradiction, but you can't prove that it's going to be forever true. Yes. And do you believe that we shouldn't hurt people? Yeah, I believe we shouldn't hurt people. Is that always true? I don't know. What do you mean you don't know? How can you not know? Because Daniel's not allowed to doubt his worldview. He said so. Doubt is the cornerstone of growth in understanding. To hang a question mark, to quote Bertrand Russell now and again, on things you've long taken for granted. That's what skepticism is about. That's what knowledge is about. That's what honesty in intellectual pursuits is about. You have to doubt it. It doesn't mean you have to sit here mired in doubt. It doesn't mean you spent every waking minute of every day doubting everything about everything. It's, should I doubt this? Yes. Do I have good reason to believe it's true? Yes. Do I have good reason to believe it's not true? Not currently. Am I open to changing my mind on this when somebody presents it? You bet. That's it.
So again, on the law of non-contradiction, when I say that there's not empirical proof, I'm saying there's no empirical proof that those things will always be true. There's no way to demonstrate that. There's no way to demonstrate currently a circumstance
I'm going through
under which
this
those would
again
be false.
for the umpteenth
But
time.
I don't have complete knowledge of the universe and wouldn't pretend to. And so my reliance on them is contingent on the fact that they continue to demonstrate that they work. And as soon as they stop, then my confidence in them will be diminished. That's how confidence works. Right now, identity, non-contradiction, excluded middle, consistently demonstrate in all circumstances and in all conceivable circumstances this. I'm not sitting around waiting for somebody to demonstrate that they're not going to work sometime. I don't have any good reason to think that's likely to ever happen. I can't even imagine the circumstance. And so far, nobody else has been able to imagine circumstances under which that's the case. I'm not saying I believe them, but that as they are presuppositions, but that doesn't mean that there aren't empirical facts that are consistent with them. See,
Then how are they non-empirical?
There is not, as I just explained a minute ago, there's not an empirical way to demonstrate that they could be false. But there are empirical ways to demonstrate that they are currently reliable. Every piece of data we ever evaluate is a constant demonstration of identity, non-contradiction, and excluded middle. Everything, the fact that I'm me and you're you, and I'm not you and you're not me, all of those pieces of empirical information are evaluated within the realm of logic, and they continue to demonstrate that the logic, the foundations of logic, lead us to accurate models of reality. That's all that they have to be. There's nothing about that that says they're not related to the empirical world. Of course they are. Categorization, this is what set theory is. A isn't just a letter, it represents a set of things. It could be the set of empirical things. It could be the set of empirical things that are blue, green, and come out on Thursday. I don't know what that is, but somebody in Yu-Gi-Oh! Or Pokemon.
While this is me giving an explanation for the fifth time, it's worth noting that while what I'm saying is accurate and perhaps useful to people logically, the subject of this hour of the debate is supposed to be, is there good evidence for the existence of a God, which Daniel has failed to address, epically.
Pokemon's got something like that. The empirical facts demonstrate the reliability of that, but it also can be shown as an abstraction, which is why I pointed out a Venn diagram.
Well, can you answer the
And
moral?
it's still not evidence of God.
The moral claim.
The moral claim is irrelevant to this hour of the debate. I'm still waiting.
How
for
is that
evidence of God.
irrelevant? You just bloviated about the law of non-contradiction. Explain.
So he's saying, because I'm going on about law of non-contradiction, why don't I also address this moral question he's been asking me? And the answer is because this debate is about, is there evidence for existence of God, not let's evaluate Matt's moral positions. You should have asked for that debate. I said yes to every fucking thing you wanted.
Explain to us this moral principle of harming others for no reason is wrong. Presumably you accept that. Give me the empirical evidence or the objectively verifiable fact that that's the case. Like when you talk about everything in nature demonstrates the law of non-contradiction, that sounds like a lot of theists. Everything in nature demonstrates that God exists.
Oh my gosh. I didn't even hear this even on the review. The very notion that he's saying that I sound like a theist. No. The very nature demonstrates that God exists. That's not what I mean. I mean, every single example of categorization, of set theory, etc., continues to reaffirm identity, non-contradiction, excluded middle. I'm sorry, Daniel, that you don't understand any of this well enough to even have a thought about it. But it's not at all like saying all of nature attests to God's handiwork. No, all of nature attests to nature.
You have a certain intuition, a logical intuition about the law of non-contradiction.
No, I don't have a logical intuition about the law of non-contradiction, and you don't know what intuitions are, as you've demonstrated conclusively now for 49 and a half minutes.
And that's why you use terms like, oh, it works. You know, I have confidence in it.
No, I use terms like it works and I have confidence in it because it works and I have confidence in it. Logic works. The entirety of reasoning runs on identity, non-contradiction, excluded middle. Our ability to categorize and think things. Everything that you know about mathematics, about computer programs, about any assessment of anything is contingent on identity, non-contradiction, and excluded middle. I'm sorry you skipped that class.
Confidence is not diminished. You're expressing an intuition, which is,
Nope.
as I defined, a tendency to find something compelling. That's all you're
No, I'm expressing an analytic conclusion that is tentative and subject to revision. Inference isn't intuition.
expressing. You're just trying to fit it into this mold of empiricism. But you contradict yourself. At first, you say that it's non-falsifiable, it's non-empirical,
Correct.
and then you still have this standard of falsifiability.
No, I don't. No, I don't. And Daniel demonstrates that he doesn't understand what falsifiability is. I've pointed out it's not falsifiable. The claim that this is always true is not falsifiable. The claim that this is true and works in this circumstance is absolutely demonstrable. And it's true and works in every circumstance we've ever been able to come up with and any that we could potentially imagine right now. Until somebody comes up with a circumstance under which it doesn't work, we can consistently say, or we can say that identity, non-contradiction, excluded middle work in all circumstances that we've been able to assess. It is not the same as saying it works in all circumstances that could ever exist. It may seem that that's the case, but we can't demonstrate that. I'm sorry that you're confusing two different statements about the concept.
For non-contradiction. But please answer this question. Will we ever determine in the future that harming others for no reason it can be correct?
He wants me to answer this question. will we ever determine in the future that harming others without reason is correct? Now, whether or not I have an answer to that is completely independent from whether or not there is an answer to that or whether or not an answer to that is known. And all of that is completely irrelevant to whether or not there's good evidence for the existence of God. Daniel's trying to weasel in something that's completely unrelated.
So this is a demonstration of what happens when you don't listen and when you have a flawed epistemology, because I was just told that because I bloviated about the laws of non-contradiction, identity, and excluded middle, that this required me to answer, or perhaps bloviate, about his other irrelevant question that is also not about the evidence of God, and you sure are wrong. I don't have that requirement in this particular debate.
Yeah, you can dodge it. Dodge it. No problem.
Okay.
So
At
external
least
world.
when I dodge it, I'm
External.
not constantly dodging the subject of the actual
No, the
debate.
subject is evidence. The
No,
subject
sir,
is
the subject
evidence
is
and
evidence for
epistemology.
God,
It's literally
not-
in the title.
The subject is
Evidence for God. What is our
It
standard
not-
of evidence?
It is not
If you don't
Matt
understand the
justify
debate, if
whether
you
or
don't
not it's okay
understand
to
the
harm
debate, you
people.
don't understand that.
I
That's
don't
not my
understand the
problem.
debate. Literally, he
Evidence,
chose it. We've already gone through.
epistemology is the
You know
core
what?
of the debate.
Whatever.
Evidence and epistemology is the
I'm-
core of the
I
debate.
rest my case. I
Yeah,
rested
you've
it
rested
an
a
hour
long
ago.
time ago. You
Go
rested
ahead.
a long
keep,
time ago.
Keep telling me I don't understand the debate that you picked and,
That's
and
what
labeled.
that's what you keep telling me that I don't understand.
But you don't understand.
Yeah, so
Good luck.
this is the whole debate is about evidence and epistemology. I gave evidence.
No, this wasn't a debate about general evidence in epistemology. It wasn't a debate about general foundations of evidence in epistemology. You picked, is there good evidence for the existence of God? And then you changed it to, is there evidence for the existence of God? Because you already know there's not good evidence, but one of these days you'll figure out there's not evidence either.
So you just don't accept it. So the question becomes, why don't you accept it? And you're not able to justify why you accept certain things on the basis of not having any kind of scientific evidence behind that. You said you accept the certain laws of logic, you accept certain moral principles, you accept that the external world exists, you accept those things without any kind of empirical.
This is going to be a parade of whataboutism coming up, because he's going to be like, what about memories? What about this? What about that? What about this? What about that? As if any of that's relevant to whether or not there's evidence for God.
Evidence. So that says that you're either being inconsistent with your standard of evidence. I mean, that's what it shows. You're inconsistent with your standard of evidence. Explain how you are consistent when there are things that you do accept without any empirical evidence, but you're accusing me of claiming God exists without empirical.
So he's wanting to say this is the whole Tukul-K fallacy right here. Matt's inconsistent with his standards of evidence. He has a different standard of evidence for God than he does for everything else. Well, first of all, I have different standards of evidence for different types of claims, as does anybody who has any sort of sound epistemology, because not all claims are consistent with the facts of reality in the same way. If you say you have a pet dog and you have a pet dragon, those are two very different things. And the evidence that I'm going to expect from you, because your claim is either consistent with reality or not, is going to differ and vary. But at the end of the day, he's trying to make this, once again, like all of my other goofy opponents, trying to make it about me. Matt believes things that he says he shouldn't believe. No, it's not true. I don't. You haven't given an example. What you've done is asked me to answer this moral question over and over and over again because you want to deflect from the fact that you did not present anything even remotely close to evidence for the existence of God.
Evidence. When I'm saying that, that's not relevant to establishing that God exists and that God is a part of reality.
So now I've been accused of another thing that's not true, which is not explaining why I didn't accept his claim about intuitive evidence for God. And I think I specifically said that it had to do with whether or not that evidence is consistent with facts and whether or not it excludes other potential hypotheses. This is how we tell whether or not something is evidence for a proposition, because right now, if somebody has an intuitive notion about a God, well, that's evidence that maybe that could be evidence that there's a God. It could be evidence that they're delusional. And so until you come up with a methodology to distinguish between those two, you don't get to declare that their intuition is in fact evidence for or of or from or a God, because thoughts about a God don't in any way demonstrate that a God is real. You have to draw. I don't care if it's intuitive. I didn't say you didn't present empirical evidence. I said you haven't presented any evidence. Even with intuitive evidence, in order to show that intuitive evidence for a God exists or is actually evidence for that God, you have to show that it excludes competing hypotheses, including this person is wrong or delusional. That is what evidence for a proposition is, whether it's empirical, intuitive, or magic.
Like if it's an intuition that there are pink elephants in this room with us and it's just me who has that intuition, yeah, you have to show that I'm not delusional. But if it's an intuition that everyone is sharing on the basis of biology and natural psychology, that's something else entirely.
Except that we don't all share this intuition that there is a God. So you still have to demonstrate that your pink elephant God is different from somebody's blue elephant God, when I don't have any reason to think there's a pink or blue elephant God.
And when we look at cognitive science of religion specifically, it's a massive field with so much peer-reviewed literature and books that have been published. They show that just like people have intuitions about morality, just like people have intuitions about the law of non-contradiction,
The peer-reviewed cognitive science is great, but it doesn't conclude that there's evidence for a God. Psychology is about people. Psychology is about human beings and what they believe. And as the psychology continues, how do you know that it's not just going to reach the conclusion that these people are delusional and gullible? Oh, I know how. Because they're believing in things that are unfalsifiable. That's the ultimate protection to any sort of claim that you're delusional, is that you believe in something that's unfalsifiable. Nobody can ever show that you're wrong. I'm just pointing out that you're believing in something that's unfalsifiable and that you haven't demonstrated even positive evidence for it. Falsifiability doesn't say there's not positive evidence for the claim. It says there's no way to demonstrate that it's not true, despite the fact that there may be positive evidence for the claim. You say all swans are white and you keep finding white swans, you've got lots of evidence that all swans are white. But the statement, all swans are white, is false. And none of the evidence that you pointed to is actually evidence for all swans. Each of those individual bits is evidence for this swan. It's an equivocation between this and all. You've changed the scope. I'm sorry that you're not precise enough with your language to understand this.
Just like people have intuitions about aesthetics and certain aesthetic principles, they have theological intuitions about an afterlife. That's why we see so many cultures independently have this idea that after we die, our mind persists. That is something biological. It's part of human psychology. The idea that the universe has been created for a purpose, specifically to benefit mankind. This is an idea found in one form or another in the vast majority of all human religions. Did they?
And where's the evidence that it's true?
How, if religions are just something that people made up in their villages, how are all of these people across the world at different times and places coming up with the same exact kind of theology?
They're not, and that's dishonest. So first of all, even if they were, that still wouldn't prove it's true. If Daniel's basic argument is, if people are just making this stuff up, why is it so similar? Because people are similar, because people are coming up with similar explanations for similar problems and similar questions. It's the reason why fantasy beasts that don't exist in reality exist in stories across different cultures at different times. It's why superheroes are created. It's why gods are created. Man does this, Superman does this, God is Superman. But even if everybody on the planet developed the exact same intuition about the exact same God and that God's name, that isn't proof, or I mean, it would certainly be counted as positive evidence towards the proposition, but then you would have to demonstrate how it's falsifiable, because how do you know that somebody doesn't have a mind control device from some technological thing? I'm not saying that's possible. I'm not saying it exists. I'm saying that's a candidate explanation you would need to rule out.
The belief in God, the belief in God as a creator and monotheism, this is something that is shared within so many different religions. They come to the same conclusion independently of each other. What cognitive scientists of religion say is that this is because it's biologically rooted. So they do surveys of different cultures, they do childhood developmental studies, and they survey children on what they actually believe prior to becoming socialized within a particular social milieu, and they identify what I referred to in the presentation as a natural theology. There are certain beliefs, the belief that if you are a bad person and you harm others and you take advantage of others, the universe is somehow going to punish you for that. And if you're a good person, you're a charitable person, the universe will benefit you. That is something that is an intuition that's shared universally.
And yet it's not true.
Across all different cultures and religions. So these are things that need to be investigated. They need to be taken into account. It's not a delusion. Someone's just.
I'm in favor of investigating them. And that if you just said, hey, people have intuitions about gods and we should investigate it, I'd have said, yeah, no need to debate that. I'm in favor of investigating it. As a matter of fact, we have investigated it, and it's failed to demonstrate evidence to support the propositions.
Just delusionally thinking, oh, there might be, pink elephants in this room. That's strawmanning the intuitive position.
I'm not the one that came up with the pink elephants in the room. You are. You're the one that's strawmanning your own position, Daniel. I asked you for evidence, and you admitted you can't give any.
So,
other than your flawed claim that intuitive claims are evidence.
It's simply not true that all people across all times have come to the same conclusions or the same intuitions about gods or an afterlife. Not only is there a good example in the people of the Paraha and the Amazon that had no God concept until somebody decided to jump in and present them with one, but the various notions about things differ, which is how we ended up with thousands of different religions, with thousands of different denominations. Yeah. And the bigger problem here, this is one of the reasons why the world shifted to, what was the phrase that you used, the cultural...
Cognitive colonialism.
Cognitive colonialism, basically. His view of why we've shifted to a focus that is more on empirical evidence and analytic thinking. And the real reason that happened, it wasn't some atheist cabal, because even though I would like to live in a pod and do drugs and play video games, not all atheists share that goal of mine. But amongst people, there are competing ideas, competing intuitions about a God. There's a reason why religions come in conflict, because they have competing intuitions about a God and no way to demonstrate which, if any of them, are right. And that is why we began to rely more on analytical thinking and assessing data to say, you know what, we can find out what's right on this, we can't really do it on this, we can do it on this and this, but we can't really do it on this. And you guys who want to rely on intuition about something that you think is important, which the rest of us don't think actually impacts our lives, you need to make a demonstration. I agree, if there is a God, that's one of the most important questions ever, which is why I've spent my life addressing it, both as a Christian and as an atheist. But whether or not there's a God is a big enough question that if you simply relied on intuition, you might end up in the wrong religion. And so if there is in fact some God, and he's going to judge you, which some of the religions say, based on whether or not you accept that God versus a competing God, then it is that God's responsibility to provide sufficient evidentiary warrant for accepting its existence. And if that comes in the form of intuition, that's fine, but it has to be demonstrably reliable. That's the problem of God. And it's the problem of relying on intuition. And it's the reason why in an hour-long discussion about evidence of God, I'm the only one that actually talked about and addressed all aspects of that topic.
So Daniel's going to address something one more time. And I figure because we're getting right at the end of the first hour, and it's taken me almost 2 hours to get through it, let me address this. Daniel keeps going on about whether or not it's wrong to hurt someone for no reason. The answer is no. It's not wrong to hurt someone for no reason. I'm not aware of anybody intentionally hurting someone for no reason. They have lots of reasons. They want to hurt them. They want to do harm. They're angry. They're whatever. Those are all reasons. They're just bad reasons. But if somebody actually hurt someone for no reason, which means it was incidental, then perhaps that's not even a moral issue. If I step on your foot incidentally, I have hurt you for no reason. I did not have any intent to hurt you. I did not have a reason to hurt you. So is me accidentally stepping on your foot immoral? This is one of the reasons why I didn't answer Daniel's question at the time. One, because I knew he was leading to something which we'll get to later. And two, because we would have had to have a side discussion about how to properly phrase the question to get to the heart of what you actually want to ask. Is it wrong to intentionally harm someone without a good reason, without an ameliorating reason, without a rational justification? Like, would it be wrong for me to slice your throat? Well, you can't answer that question, because what if I'm giving you a necessary tracheotomy? I've done harm, but I'm alleviating harm as well. Is it wrong to push someone? Well, if I'm pushing you out of the way of the fire, then no, it's not immoral. And so his simplified question of, is it wrong to hurt someone for no reason, which he kept reiterating, it may be that there's no moral evaluation of that at all, because there was no intent. Where there's intent, it would seem that there's a reason. I don't know how you can have intent to harm without a reason for it. But I didn't feel like going into that with Daniel, because the subject of this debate is there good evidence for a God?
Not as true that harming people for no reason is wrong. Whether that's true or not, that also has a major impact on human life. It has a huge impact on human society and politics. Where's the demonstrable proof of that? Where is the scientific evidence? Why can't you answer? You accept it.
You picked the debate topic, not me.
Who is this clown laughing? Like, you don't need to laugh at everything he says. Look, show me the proof. Show me the demonstrable proof of those kinds of things within morality, law of non-contradiction, logic, all of these other things that you take and you accept without objectively verifiable facts, show me that that is a correct standard to use. If you can't demonstrate that, then why do you have this standard of evidence that you apply just to the question of God? That is inconsistent. Furthermore, the Amazonian group that you mentioned, they do believe in spirit beings. They do believe in an afterlife. So that is shared universally amongst people, even in the depths of the Amazon. Why? Because it is biologically rooted. And if you want to go and disagree with the cognitive scientists of religion, go ahead, write a peer-reviewed paper about it. But this kind of new atheist nonsense is old hat, old news. It's been debunked
New atheist,
decades ago.
new nonsense. New atheist, new nonsense that was debunked decades ago. Daniel can't even string together a lie that isn't self-contradictory.
You're just repeating it. So I want to see demonstration of these other things that you accept as being true, as being correct, that you accept. They're also very important for human society, whether morality, whether there's any kind of moral truth, whether...
He wants to see a demonstration of these other things that I accept. And like I said, you should have picked that as the debate topic then.
There's an external world. Do you think that has something to... that is a big part of our understanding of reality? Of course.
Whether or not there's actually an external world may not have any relevance to whether or not you and I experience what we perceive as an external world. Sorry.
It is. Of course, morality is a big part of our understanding of the...
Yeah, and it would have been a good topic for a debate. Oh, by the way, we're going to be touching on it in part 3.
Of reality. What about our memories? How do we know for sure? Can you demonstrate to me that the entire...
Here's the whataboutism parade that I talked about. Oh, how do you demonstrate that reality is real? How do you demonstrate that your memory is real? How do you demonstrate that this isn't the 5-minute universe? He's just like, let me rattle off all these epistemological questions within philosophy, because if I show that there are things that philosophers don't know, then all of a sudden people forget that this debate was about, is there good evidence for God? And Daniel presented none and didn't even attempt to.
Universe wasn't created 5 minutes ago, and all of our memories of the past were implanted in us. How can you demonstrate that scientifically? Daniel. Is there any objectively verifiable fact that can prove that it wasn't? Our memories are pretty important, right? So show me any kind of consistent standard of proof, standard of evidence that you're applying to God. Show where it applies in these other very critical human domains.
Asked and answered. I did it at the beginning. I talked about the standards of evidence and how it applies to a bunch of different claims. This debate is not, hey, Matt, justify everything that I think you believe, which, by the way, everything you think I believe isn't necessarily what I believe. But if you're interested, on my personal YouTube account, I just did a video about whether or not the 5-minute universe hypothesis is true. If you'd picked that as a debate topic, we could have maybe done that. But I've already done it, and I've already addressed this first hour's topic. I have nothing further to add on whether or not there's evidence of God when nothing's been presented.
Yeah, I mean, this is unexplained. You accept many things as true. Or you accept them as just working, or it seems to work. But basically, you're saying that you feel that it's compelling. You have that intuition.
That's not what I'm saying, basically or otherwise. That's
it is
not an accurate representation. No,
it is.
No, it's not. I specifically
we're back
pointed out how
we're back to interruption. We're back to interruption.
Okay, if you're just going to not tell the truth about what I literally said, people can rewind. It's fine.
No, you said something. I'm interpreting what you said.
Well,
I'm interpreting what you said.
Your interpretation with your flawed epistemology.
Yeah.
What they need is what I actually
the debate is about
said.
is there evidence for God, not epistemology.
The debate was is there evidence for God?
Is epistemology.
You picked it. You can derp all you want. This is your fault, not mine.
Yeah, derp all you want. So again,
brings us to the next section of our debate. We're gonna have
that brings me to the end of this portion of this. Yeah, so that was 2 hours to cover the first hour of this debate. And it's one of the reasons why I held off. I wanted to try and do it right. I'm going to go ahead and get this posted. I'm going to work on parts 2 and part 3. Let me know if this, listening to it and going through it, is, if you like it better than just the shorter summary thing that I might do. I'm going to record a shorter summary of part 2, and then I'm going to do this again for part 3. So expect another couple hours of video in short order. In the meantime, thanks everybody for tuning in. I will be back. Take care of yourself in the meantime. Bye-bye.